Key message number one of this video is that crop management decisions interact. So while management itself interacts with environment and genetics, like I want to harp on in this course, management decisions themselves are going to interact and influence each other. The second takeaway is that the types of management decisions farmers in a given area are going to favor has a lot to do with the environment. Okay, so this is E by M interaction. And I'll just give a quick example here. So this is from a presentation by Dr. Dwayne Beck. He's a farmer / researcher in South Dakota who is quite well known on the speaking circuit promoting no-till. And so this is from one of his presentations, what he calls tillage truths. Okay, all tillage tools destroy soil structure, decrease water infiltration, and reduce organic matter. And so he asked as a rhetorical question, how much tillage is necessary? And in Dr. Dwayne Beck's opinion, it's basically zero. Okay. What you see here are two climatographs, one from Columbia, South Dakota, one from Kemptville, Ontario. And a climatograph, well, the bars show average monthly rainfall every month of the year, and those lines show average daily high and average daily low temperature. So let's just focus on the bars that represent rainfall. In Columbia, rainfall is very unevenly distributed throughout the year. Right? It goes up and then down. Whereas in Kemptville, it's actually quite evenly distributed throughout the year. Rainfall is. So this black line I drew across allows you to compare precipitation between both climatographs. That's at the 2-inch or 50 millimeters of precipitation line. So in Columbia, South Dakota, most months have less than 50 mils of precipitation. In Kemptville, Ontario, and most parts of Ontario as well, there's never a month with less than 50 mils of precipitation. And this difference is most apparent in the winter months. Okay, it's much drier in South Dakota. And so this difference in the total amount of rainfall or precipitation and its distribution has impacts on things like the amount of soil moisture, how wet that soil is in late April and May at the start of the planting season, right? It's going to impact, for example, tillage dries out the soil. That might be a benefit in one location and a negative in another. And so the environment is going to affect the types of management practices that farmers find favorable. Another thing to keep in mind is how genetics interact with management. So I've been attending quite a few of these winter crop meetings, really all virtually, of course, with American researchers or farmers, coming and providing recommendations. They're really great speakers and it's really good information. But for example, here are some things to think about, right? So I attended the Corn Whisperer, Dr. Bob Nielsen from Purdue University, talking about, high yielding corn. And this is a slide where he talks about when yield potential is formed, and so the types of management factors or decisions that should be thought you need to think about at these different times. So, for example, he talks kernel number per row is set by about V14. Okay, so V14 in Indiana is about 20 days away from silking. So you have 20 days of vegetative growth left. Whereas in Ontario, V14 is about 10 days away from silking. This, of course, will depend on the year and where you are in the province, but generally you have a lot more days of growth left after V14 in Indiana. Okay, and so that is going to influence the type of management factors, right? Doing something 20 days before silking is different than doing it 10 days before silking. A lot of soybean yield contest winners are basically south of the Mason-Dixon line, right? They're in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. And those farmers are growing determinate soybean varieties. Okay, in Canada, we grow indeterminate soybean varieties. You all know this, but the management that they promote is specific to their kind of soybean, and so it may or may not translate to Canada. So today, the effect of crop management decisions are assessed on a per area basis, not on a per plant basis. And in fact, the definition of an agronomic measurement, right, what agronomy does, those measurements are always made on a per area basis, per acre, per hectare, per meter squared, okay, never on a per plant basis. Now, prehistoric farmers, it was a different story, right? Land was not scarce in pre-modern times, and farmers wanted to maximize, how many seeds they could get from every plant they harvested. And so their unit of measurement was, grains that they harvested per seed that they planted, because everything was done by hand. I want to turn your attention to a very important distinction, which is when we assess plant performance versus crop performance. Now, a crop is the community of plants. And you might think, well, what's the difference between, looking at per plant yield and yield on a crop level or per area basis? And it is huge, okay? Management decisions which can increase the yield of an individual plant is completely different than yield or management practices that increase yield at the community level. The classic example of management that improves per plant versus per area yield is seeding rate, or what we scientists like to call planting density. So obviously lower seeding rates, you're going to end up with plants that look like the corn on the left, very large and vigorous with lots of ears. If this was soybeans, it would be lots of nodes. If this was wheat or a spring cereal, lots of tillers. Versus on the right, as you increase seeding rates or plant density, each individual plant will be smaller. Okay, it'll produce less yield per plant, but you're increasing yield per area. One thing to be aware of is this, agronomy by Twitter, where you have really nice photos of individual plants, supposedly taken from a field, and making judgments about whatever certain varieties or crop management practices or whatever based on a comparison of individual plants visually. So this is again taken from Twitter. This is canola, and so you see canola plant on the left and on the right, and you might think, wow, I really want that plant on the left. That's the variety I would want, or whatever the management practice is that's getting that canola variety. But this is actually the same variety of canola planted the same day. One was just in a community, in a field, the one on the right, so it's smaller. And the one on the left was just like on a dirt patch, like, by the side of the field. And it was growing on its own. And so it's important not to be misled when just looking at photos of individual plants, because agronomy is not about individual plants. It's about yield per area. The other thing to keep in mind is that there's always bias, right? If you walk out in the field and you want to select a couple of plants just as a visual comparison to show people, or if someone does that to show you, there's going to be bias. And private sector and public sector agronomists and breeders that I talk to, I mean, the way you do this, if you want to be unbiased, is you go out early at the V5 or V6 stage of growth, say in June in some point, and then you put a flag next to plants and you say, okay, come maturity, these are the plants I'm going to look at, and just evaluate visually, because otherwise there's just too much room for your own bias. If you're walking around at harvest and you're saying, oh, this looks like a good plant to pick out, and it's the one that's either higher yielding or lower yielding, depending on what you want to show. It would be almost impossible to go over every single management aspect in a single lecture, but every management decision that a farmer makes is influenced by laws that govern, the productivity of temperate production systems. And so we're going to talk about 7 laws, 7 laws in total, and these have to do with either the physical environment or just basic principles of crop ecophysiology.